Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick too. I've been working on this video for quite some time and I'm extremely excited to show you guys a nearly perfected version of what is by far the best build that has ever existed in Diablo 4. I'm going to go over absolutely everything that you guys need to know and I'm going to try to leave no stone unturned. Hopefully the video doesn't end up being 5,000 years long, but I just want you guys to know every step of the way on how to do what I'm doing on screen here. In my first attempt, I was able to do a pit 150. You can hit for the highest I've hit for is 149 trillion, I think it was, and there's still some optimizations that I can make, so 200 trillion is definitely on the table, so you can do unbelievably insane damage. The build is literally unkillable. I have 29,000 health, and I have 32,000 health, and I could get up to 40,000 if I do some stuff with my gear, and my resistances aren't even capped. You can just absolutely decimate everything in the game. Tormented bosses literally die in one hit, speed farm anything that you want. By far just the craziest build that I've ever used. I'm going to have a speed farm version of this build posted pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. And as always, like the video if you find it helpful. But there's a lot to talk about, so let's just get into it. Real quick before I actually get into everything, I want to give a huge shout out to Sanctum. I've been talking with him quite a good bit, and he's given me a lot of helpful information when it comes to Spiritborn stuff, and he streams quite a lot. I haven't really been streaming, so if you have any Spiritborn questions, feel free to just go check him out. He's a great dude. And big thanks to him for answering a lot of my questions and also just talking with me and bouncing ideas off of him. Without further ado, let's get into it. There's a lot of different variations with this build and a whole bunch of different stuff to talk about. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comments and I will make an FAQ section on the written build guide. As you can see, I have the written guide pulled up and I'm going to have multiple versions of this linked down below. Particularly, what's important is knowing where you are in the build process so that you know which build to actually follow. I want this video to be very detailed, so for those of you guys that just want a speedrun version of the build, check out the build link and I will very quickly right now explain it. If you're going to stay around the whole time and you want to know all the little min-maxy things and all the detail, just skip this portion. Everything will be timestamped. How does the build work? We are using Rod of Kepeleke, which consumes all of our vigor every time that we cast our ability, makes our Quill Volley count as a core and a basic skill simultaneously. This makes our hits guaranteed crits, and our crits will do extra damage based on how much vigor that we have. We use Banished Lords Talisman in tandem with this to immediately expend all of our vigor, and then every single cast of ours will not only be a crit, it will also be an overpower. In order to achieve the guaranteed overpower, we need to have 240 maximum vigor. Just trust me, you only need 240. How do you get to 240? You have a Kepeleke with greater affix maximum resource. You can use a resourcefulness elixir to give you plus 25 maximum resource. And then there is the Menagerist glyph, which is going to give you plus 33 maximum resource. The only thing that will ever prevent you from using the Banished Lords version of the build is not reaching 240 maximum resource. And then you want to pair that with Tibalt's Will, if you don't have 240, you can slam on Tibalt's Will or a Shaco instead to reach the 240 breakpoint. In tandem with 240, you need a Ring of the Midnight Sun with at least a 47% roll, and then you get Vigor Generation via Ravager, and also some resource generation in your Paragon Board. And then it's a very easy way to test this. You hit the training dummies, and if you see your Vigor instantly go from, I need to pop an elixir there. If you see your Vigor go from 275 and it stays at 275, then that means that it is working. If you hit the training dummy and it looks like this, where it goes from 35 to 275, that means that it is not working. So that is an easy way to test it. Overpower scales off of our max HP, so we scale our HP into the moon. Paired with the fact that the Viscous Shield Paragon node is currently bugged, we try to get a 100% barrier on our character, which is easily achieved via having the Quay rune, giving you the Druid's Earthen Bulwark. You pair this with 122.3% barrier generation, so that every single time that you pop the Bulwark, you get a full barrier, as shown right here. You get barrier generation via having Amethyst on your gear, as well as tempering barrier generation onto your gear too. Then you just scale up your max HP as much as humanly possible, because that is going to scale up your barrier size. Then you want to get maximum resolve stacks on 1 or 2 pieces of gear. These tempers are extremely powerful, and then you pair this with the redirected force aspect, giving you increased crit damage relative to your block chance. Each stack of resolve is going to give you increased block chance via the interdiction aspect, which is then going to just scale your crit damage to the moon. For our skills, we use Scourge for extra damage, Armored Hide is for block, Unstoppable, and some Gorilla stuff in the skill tree. Hunter is for additional damage, 100% increase to injured enemies, and it maxes out our ferocity stacks. Ravager is for 30% Vigor Generation, and then Vortex is simply just for quality of life. Follow the build links down below religiously. If there's anything that is on screen that is different than what is in the build link, do not worry about it. The build links will always be updated, and they are 100% relevant to you. I promise you that. You will be fine if you follow the build links, and if anything with the build updated gets updated, it will be updated in the build link. All right, now that we have the TLDW out of the way, I'm going to talk. I have a huge weight lifted on my shoulders. I'm just going to ramble for 40 minutes, so hopefully you guys let me do that. Quickly, let's go over the differences between the versions of the build and at which breakpoint you can actually swap between the two, because this is a question that I see asked all of the time. You can actually start almost the second that you hit endgame, you can kind of start working toward the ultimate version of the build. There's just a couple things that you need to know in order to actually do that. But if you're just starting out in Spiritborn, 100% check out the leveling guide. This is very good and still relevant to this day. Follow the leveling guide to a T, and then the second that you hit level 60, and for most of you guys, follow the early endgame version of the build. This version will have you try to get some of the uniques that are very good, and it'll early on have you scaling unyielding hits. The biggest problem for you early on is actually going to be defenses. Later into the build, you're going to scale so much max HP and have so much barrier that you're almost unkillable without armor cap and without resistance cap. Although those things are easy to achieve, when you hit level 60, reaching armor cap and resistance cap will be quite challenging, but that's a majority of your survivability, which can just be solved with a couple items such as Yen's Blessing. If you get resistance to all elements, greater affix there, boom, your resistances are solved. If you get things like Aspect of Forest Power, this is going to give you maximum life barrier, and it's also going to give you armor. Early on into the build, one of the most important things that you can do, I think I updated the Paragon board here, let's see. Yeah, I did. One of the most important things is to get Viscous Shield immediately in the Paragon board, and then try to scale your barrier as much as possible, and then scale your HP as much as possible, because Viscous Shield is currently bugged. I made a video talking about that in depth yesterday. If you want to know how it is bugged, just watch that video. All you need to know is HP plus barrier equals damage skyrocket, okay? So early on, Forest Power will give you a lot of that barrier, so you don't need as much barrier generation. It'll also help you reach armor cap. Harmony of Ebawaka early on is quite a lot of damage, and for most people, I'm going to recommend that you keep it the entire time. Outside of that, you just want to make sure that your chest and pants have a lot of defensive stuff on them, so armor, max HP, resistance to all elements if that is still an issue for you. Just prioritize reaching 1000 armor and maxing out your resistances early on into the build. When you can swap over to this version of the build, which is still going to have you try to reach those resistance and armor caps, it's just a little more stringent with the gear, because it's going to assume that you have slightly better gear, and I can't make 50 different planners based on every individual person's gear. But you can swap over to this version of the build pretty much once you have a Banished Lords Talisman and you reach 240 Vigor. Reaching 240 is actually not that difficult. You can do this super early into the build. There's a few ways to do this pretty easily. One of the main ways is getting a Rod of Kepeleke with maximum resource on it, greater affix. If you don't have this, just get a normal one. You want to prioritize the bottom roll being a high percent, because a lot of your damage is that bottom roll. By the way, the reason you need 240 Vigor is because otherwise Banished Lords is not going to be a guaranteed overpower every time, and it only needs to be 240 because it's factoring in the base cost of Quill Volley being 275, so 35. So 240 plus 35 is 275. Anyways, you need 240 Vigor, Rod of Kepeleke with max resource, GA, and then masterworking that makes that very easy. Then you want a Elixir of Resourcefulness. Later into the build, we don't use this because we use a max HP elixir. As you can see, I have 271 Vigor, so I don't need that. But early on, this will be very good for you. And then you want to use the Menagerous Glyph and level this up ASAP, and this will give you a ton of maximum resource too. If you still are not at 240, you want to grab a Tibalt's Will. It's not great for the build. It will reduce your damage by quite a bit, but it has maximum resource on it. Or you could use a Harlequin Crest as well. Again, that is a damage loss compared to Ebawaka, but it still is going to give you maximum resource, so you can reach that breakpoint. So once you have 240 Vigor, you can swap to this setup immediately, and the main difference between this version and this version is simply just going to be the Paragon Board. Then you can just follow this pretty much the entire time. The Glass Cannon endgame I simply put here because this is what I currently have, and it is using a normal legendary helmet. Talk about that in a minute here. And I swapped Forest Power for Aspect of Apprehension. We no longer need the armor or barrier with Forest Power once the build is good enough, but if you're missing Barrier Generation, then you use Forest Power early on, and you just swap to Aspect of Apprehension for more damage later. Let's go over the build piece by piece and why I have everything set up the way that I do for those of you guys that want some more detail. So when it comes to our skills, we're using Quill Volley. You can use Crushing Hand instead if you want, but a lot of stuff will change. I will make an updated video on Crushing Hand pretty soon, but Quill Volley is by far and away the highest damaging skill that we have access to on this class. Vortex is very good for quality of life. It's just sucking the mobs inward. Ravager, we basically are using for the 30% Vigor Generation so that we can instantly refund with our Banished Lords Talisman and Ring of the Midnight Sun. Armored Hide is for the 100% block chance while it's active, which is going to scale our redirected force aspect, and it also is giving us Unstoppable and some synergy within the skill tree. And then I'm using Scourge. Scourge gives us a 50% increased damage against crowd-controlled enemies, and it also fears enemies, and also gives us a crazy amount of lifesteal. And I'm using the Aspect of Apprehension here to give us increased damage against feared enemies, which we are fearing them with Scourge. And you want to be spamming this on cooldown pretty much. And then we have the Hunter. Hunter's insane. 100% damage against injured enemies, and when you press it, it's going to instantly overfill your ferocity stacks to maximum. So whatever your max ferocity stacks is, you'll achieve it with the Hunter. And then we have a lot of skill points that give us increased damage after using our ult, and so we want to just be spamming our Hunter quite a lot. When it comes to skill tree, I'm probably going to put text on the screen here. I change my skill tree based on the build that I am playing and how I have it set up. A lot of the points here are actually flexible. I went for 100% damage in the version that I'm playing here. In the planner, I'm going to have a little bit more survivability for you guys because nodes like follow through, 6% damage is really not a big deal. You could grab Perseverance for a disgusting amount of survivability. I just went full damage because my gear's good enough to be able to. Please just follow the planner. I get questions about the skill tree all the time. I promise you're okay. I'll give you a hug. Just follow the planner. It'll be okay. So we just have 2 points here that are throwaway. Max out Quill Volley, advantageous for extra damage. And then 3 points into Vigorous is mandatory. Balance Exertion is a lot of damage. Follow Through is optional damage. Vortex, just 1 point so that we grab it. And then we get 3 points into Apex for double damage. Diminishment is good survivability, but I don't spec into it because I don't need it. I have 1 point into Mirage. 4 of these points are coming from the ring. Don't worry about it. We have 1 point here, and then we go 3 into Unrestrained Power because we're unstoppable all the time via our Armored Hide. Ravager for the Vigor Generation, like I mentioned. 1 point into Patient Guard for just a 10% block, which converts into damage with redirected force there. And then I have 4 points into Armored Hide. The reason for points into Armored Hide is so that because of Prodigy's tempo, it gives you more cooldown reduction with your skills based on how many points you have actually spent. So if I spend 4 points, not only will this last longer, so I get the block uptime higher, but the cooldown is reduced on it more. So you have this up 100% of the time, basically, which is really good. For a lot of people, I'll probably put 1 point into here to just give you 20% extra DR. And then for most people, I'll probably go into Perseverance as well for damage reduction per stack of Resolve. And then I go into Counterattack and then extra damage against close enemies. You actually don't need counterattack on your bar because Ring of the Midnight Sun gives you the passive effect. So we're just doing this for 30% crit damage. And then I go into Scourge for the extra life steal. This is insane healing. We go 2 points into Anti-Venom because this will solve our resistances. If you're using Yen's Blessing and all resistance on gear, you don't need Anti-Venom. But the way that I'm solving resistance, I'm using Anti-Venom. 3 into Resilient. I have this tempered. I'll talk about that in a second, but you get a lot of HP there. Brilliance is just extra damage. And then Potent, extra damage. Furnace, extra damage. Resolution, Spiritual Attunement, Supremacy, all extra damage. And then I have a couple extra points left over personally to go into the Hunter. In the planner, I likely won't have this for you guys because you don't really need it, but more points equals just more uptime on the buffs from it. And then we go Prodigy's Tempo. Prodigy's Tempo is why you see all the cooldowns being reduced like crazy. And again, it is based on skill ranks. So the more attack speed that you have, the faster you will reset all these cooldowns because it is based on just how fast you are attacking. And then also the more skill ranks that you have, the faster these cooldowns will be reset. You don't really have to think about it too much. Just copy paste how I have the planner set up and you'll be fine. When it comes to gear and priority and all that stuff, let's talk about it again. Follow the build link. But the most important thing that you want getting into endgame is Rod of Kepeleke and Ring of the Midnight Sun. These are the two build enablers. Kepeleke makes it to where your core skill is also going to count as a basic skill. For some stuff this is relevant, but for most intents and purposes you don't got to think about it. The main thing that we use this for is it instantly uses all of our resource so that we gain a massive crit damage multiplier. And then you pair this with Banished Lords to give you guaranteed overpowers, because every single hit is going to technically spend 275 vigor. So you can see that I go from 257.0, 257.0, and it's technically counting as 275 because it's factoring in the base cost of 35. So we get a massive crit damage multiplier here because it's scaling off of our resource. You get all of your vigor back by using Ring of the Midnight Sun, where when you crit, you just get all the vigor that you spent in the last 2 seconds. If you scale your resource generation up a little bit, you're able to get 100% of your vigor back, because this number goes from 50% to 100 basically. You don't actually need 100% vigor generation. I'll go on a quick little tangent about vigor generation. There's actually a nifty little calculator here, but you only need to get 122% total vigor generation so that the total recovered is 100%. Ideally, you want to try to get a ring that is around 50%. That's the biggest thing there for you. And then you just want to have measured Ravager always active, and then the vigor's passive for 15%. And then you want to have some within your character sheet so that you get some via intelligence, and then you just get a base amount as well, which you'll see here. Slam all of that into the calculator, and then boom, that is what your recovery is going to be. You'll see that my generation is low, and that's because I have resource cost reduction on a ring. I'll talk about that in a second, but you can mitigate not needing the resource generation on your ring by having resource generation within the Paragon board here, and also having more intelligence. We use Duelist Aspect for more ferocity stacks, which gives us more attack speed. I'll talk about attack speed breakpoints later. And then we use one of the newer things that has kind of not really been discovered, but figured out in a way, is that Interdiction is extremely strong because the block chance per resolve stack that it gives you exceeds 100% block for the scaling of Redirected Force. So Redirected Force gives you crit damage based on your block chance. We can scale up our block chance into the 400-500% because you can temper on your gear maximum resolve stacks, and then you get 15% block per resolve stack, which then converts into crit damage. This is why we don't use Tyrell's Might. This is why we don't use Tybalt's Will. It's why we don't use Harlequin Crest, because getting access to these is extremely important. It basically just gives you a ton of damage. And then we have Aspect of Apprehension, which is just increased damage against feared enemies, which alternatively could be Aspect of Forest Power if you are needing armor or more barrier generation for whatever reason. And then we have Moonrise, which is just a massive damage increase for us, movement speed, and it gives us attack speed, which is really good. One of the things that you'll notice is, like I mentioned before, scaling HP is extremely important, and there are ways that we can increase our damage with that. Viscous Shield is bugged, where it is scaling off of our base life rather than our maximum life. So effectively, the more HP that we get, the more barrier we get, because our barrier is relative to our HP, and then that converts into straight up damage via Viscous Shield. Every 12 points of health, if you have a 100% barrier, equals 1% damage. So we get barrier generation on our gear by getting Amethyst and tempering it on, and then as long as you have 122.3% barrier bonus, I'm missing some because I put my helmet on, whatever, doesn't matter. You want 122.3% barrier bonus for your Quay rune to end up giving you a barrier, or a 100% barrier rather. Then you just scale up your max HP as much as humanly possible on every single piece of gear. So let's talk about BIS gear and what you want on every single piece. When it comes to the helmet, you'll notice that in the glass cannon version, I'm using a normal legendary helmet, and you'll start to see a lot of people recommend a normal legendary helmet. Technically, a normal legendary is more damage. The reason for this is twofold. The Ebawaka bottom part, where it gives your skills increased damage, does not affect the Jaguar Spirit Hull double dipping mechanic, so you just lose a little bit of damage by using Ebawaka basically. And then you also miss out on getting HP greater affix, and then a temper giving you either maximum resolve stacks or resilient, which gives you more HP. Because HP converts into damage and does double dip with Viscous Shield and the Jaguar Spirit Hull, having Ebawaka is a damage loss, but I was still able to hit for 100 trillion, and that's why I still recommend Ebawaka, because it has all stats on it, and all stats is needed to reach a lot of breakpoints in Paragon Board and just on your character in general. And without the all stats, you'll need nearly perfect gear in order to achieve that. Also, it has movement speed on it, which is really nice. You feel incredibly slow playing without it, and you just gain some damage by playing without it. So I would not recommend playing without it for most of you guys. It's also very easy to obtain, where a good enough legendary helmet is hard. You basically need it to have greater affix max HP, dexterity, and then roll on maximum resource, and then you would need to hit a temper of maximum resolve stacks or resilient, and then masterwork that properly. When it comes to masterworking Ebawaka, try to hit movement speed or all stats. Movement speed is just very nice for quality of life. All stats is good damage, so try to prioritize those two things. Otherwise, everything else is the same. The only difference is the helmet, really, between the glass cannon version. Some stuff in skill tree, Paragon, etc. But otherwise, you could just copy paste exactly what I have on my character. For the chest, you want greater affix max HP and dexterity. That's going to give you the most damage. And then you could go resistance to all elements or armor based on your situation. And then you want to temper on the barrier generation. And then you want to temper maximum resolve stacks, again, for the interdiction and then the redirected force scaling there. And you want all your masterwork crits, if possible, to land on the maximum resolve stacks. On our gloves, we want to have max HP, greater affix, and then resource cost reduction is another thing. Resource cost reduction is currently bugged. It's not really bugged, like technically it's intended, but it doesn't seem like it should be intended. It basically gives you a multiplicative damage increase because Kepeleke actually does damage based on your vigor, and if you have resource cost reduction, it factors that in when doing the calculation for this, so it just counts as a multiplier. So it's technically better than dexterity, but dexterity is also good, and then ranks of quill volley is also solid. Temper on barrier generation, and then temper on overpower damage. On the pants, you want greater affix max HP, that's the most important, and then you want dexterity, and then ranks of basic skills, and the dexterity or basic skills could also be resistance to all elements or armor if you want to be tankier. And then you want barrier generation temper as always, and then you'll see that I have a resilient temper. Resilient is technically slightly better than getting resolve stacks, and in the planner, I'll have resilient on one piece and then resolve stacks on another piece. Resilient is good because it just gives you a crap ton of max HP. It would give you 6 ranks if you had a maximum one, and that's just a ridiculous amount of HP. Ideally, when you play the glass cannon version, 2 of your pieces you want to be resilient, and then 1 of them you want to be 13 resolve stacks. And again, you would ideally have this, all the tempers land on the resilient because that HP is just the most damage you can get. And then again, we have interdiction for the block chance per resolve stacks, which we have a lot of. On your boots, you want maximum HP, greater affix, and then you can get dexterity or armor. Again, any dexterity you can basically swap out. And then I have armor, but this armor could also be resistance, or it could even be movement speed. And then I tempered on movement speed, and I have 1 vortex size temper, just because I like the vortex being able to suck from a larger distance. You could even go 2 vortex size tempers if you want to just lose a little bit of damage, but gain more quality of life. Kepeleke, the main thing that you want is you want the bottom roll to be close to a 3% as possible. I wouldn't use anything under a 2.6%. And then you want the greater affix to be maximum resource. Currently, the chance for core skills to hit twice does not work, so that actually does not matter. You want all the greater affixes and the masterwork crits to go into maximum resource. On your ring, you want a maximum HP greater affix. You want attack speed. You want it to have resource cost reduction or dexterity, or you could also get resistance to all elements if you need that. And then resource cost reduction temper. Early into the build, you want resource generation temper, because in order to get resource cost reduction temper, you need to have 560 intelligence. That's easy to obtain with Ebawaka, and then other ways to obtain intelligence, which I will have in the planner as well for the more glass cannon version, is with Menagerous Glyph. You can just spec into boom, a little bit of intelligence there, and then you can also go into the Headhunter Glyph and get a little bit more in there too. Again, updated Paragon board will be in the description. Do not worry about my current one. It'll probably be pretty similar anyways though. You want all of your masterwork crits to go into the max HP here if possible, and then for the last temper you go overpower damage, and you want Moonrise for that attack speed and that damage. And then for my gems, I went cold resistance, shadow resistance, and then a skull. And then my resistances are really bad right now, but then what you'll do is you'll have poison resistance via the anti-venom node. And then you'll have 1 diamond in, because you'll probably have enough armor via my gear is how I planned it in the planner. And then you'll have 1 diamond in, that will give you enough to nearly be res capped as long as you have armor and res rolls here. And then if you aren't armor and res capped, you could get increased resistance to all elements by 10% there. You could also get increased 200 armor via Song of the Mountain, and then that would help you out a ton too. Feel free to use Yen's Blessing early on into the build. You'll just lose a lot of damage because you'll lose out on max HP. But Yen's Blessing also will give you the resource generation, so you can freely temper this. So then you don't need all stats as much. But again, armor, resistances, all this stuff is very interchangeable. I literally run around like this on my character, and it's fine. Also, you get armor from Raheir. Raheir Mercenary is very good because it gives you armor 15%, and it also gives you Fortify, which gives you a lot of damage when you're playing solo. Ring of the Midnight Sun, try to get a 47% roll at least, and then you want a greater affix on the dexterity, and you want a masterwork hit either all dexterity or cooldown reduction. On your Banished Lords Talisman, the most important thing is maximum HP, and then you want the lower portion to be at least like 50% probably, and then core skills, and then attack speed. Attack speed really doesn't matter because you are never going to hit the 11 frame breakpoint. I will never recommend that to people. You'll only want to try to hit 12 frame breakpoint, which I'll talk about in a sec, but prioritize getting the max HP because that is extremely strong for you. Spirit Hall, when you're using Ebawaka, you want to have Jaguar Spirit Hall, and then you want to have Gorilla Spirit Hall, so your skills count as Eagle, Jaguar, and Gorilla. If you're using a normal helmet, this is a very, very particular example, but if you're using a normal helmet, Gorilla bottom passive and Jaguar bottom passive, you can swap between these two. You only need the Jaguar one if you need extra ferocity stacks to reach an attack speed breakpoint, which we'll talk about. Like I said, that's only turbo nerd stuff for most of you. Just use Ebawaka and just follow this. When it comes to Paragon Board, again, please just check the planner. You will be fine, I promise you. How I have it set up currently is Colossal Glyph for increased damage. It also gives you multiplicative damage per stack of Resolve that you have, which is very good. And keep in mind, additive damage is very low value with this build, like leveling up the glyphs completely and then slamming in a bunch of points near them. It's very low value because we have so much overpowered damage via our health that our additive bucket is insane. So any additive damage, like 100% crit damage, is like not even 1% damage. Then we go into the Sapping Board, 30% increased damage, and then we slam Menagerist in here to give us maximum resource, and I grab some int and some strength to reach some breakpoints, but if you guys have an Ebawaka with all stats on it, you will not have to worry about that. If you follow the Glass Cannon version, you will basically need to have a Topaz as a result of not having Ebawaka all stats, and then you'll need to slam into some points here for strength and intelligence in order to reach certain breakpoints like this 510 strength here, but with Ebawaka you reach it perfectly fine. We grab all the attack speed in the Paragon Board in order to easily reach our 12 frame breakpoint, and then we go into Viscous Shield. Again, the pathing might be a little different in the Paragon Board down below, depending on your level and which board you're following. And then I grab Spirit Glyph for just extra damage basically, and then we go into the Revealing Node for 30% increased crowd control damage. We grab Headhunter Glyph. Headhunter Glyph is technically slightly better than Talon, and because Talon does not affect the Jaguar double dip where Headhunter does, and Headhunter is also going to buff some basic nodes here, so we get a lot of dexterity. And later on, once you have a lot of extra points, you just slam it all into dexterity because that's a multiplicative damage increase, whereas the additive damage is pretty low value. And getting that dexterity will help you reach some breakpoints. And then we go into the Convergence node with the Fulminate Glyph. Fulminate scales off of intelligence, not dexterity, and we need to get at least 150% lightning damage in order to max out our Convergence node. We don't play the Canny Glyph because Canny bugs out Convergence, and it also just isn't working currently. And then we grab a whole bunch of max HP here and some extra attack speed, and we want, again, 510 strength so that we can reach this extra percent health right there. That's it for the Paragon Board. Now let's talk about attack speed breakpoints, and then I'll get into some gameplay. So attack speed breakpoints, again, thanks to Sanctum for this. Basically, there are two things that you need to worry about. I would never worry about the 11 frame breakpoint, because in order to reach the 11 frame breakpoint, you need literally perfect gear. I don't even have 11 frame breakpoint, and I'm still hitting for 140 trillion. It would be... You need Greater Affix, Banished Lords Talisman, you need a Duelist rank 5, you need Greater Affix, triple GA ring. Like, it's not going to happen, okay? So just worry about the 12 frame breakpoint. This is super easy to reach. I'd recommend reaching 145.3% attack speed because your ferocity stacks gives you 5% attack speed per, but while you're attacking, you will not have max uptime on your maximum ferocity stack unless you have very, very good gear and you put a whole bunch of ranks into your the hunter. As you can see here, I can barely like get my next hunter off, so I'm kind of keeping it up, but most people almost won't be able to. So you want to have an extra 5% attack speed there, just so all of the time you're reaching the 12 frame breakpoint. In order to reach a 12 frame breakpoint, you do not need attack speed on your gloves, which is why I don't recommend it, because if you just have attack speed on your ring, attack speed on your amulet, a Moonrise aspect, and then you get all the attack speed in the Paragon board, you will reach 142.7, and this is with a plus 4 duelist. If you have a plus 5 duelist, you can add 5% there, and then boom, I'm at 147.7, which is overcapped on this by 7%. And if you wanted to, I actually have more attack speed than this because my ring is masterwork, so one of them landed in the ring there, and then my amulet is also at 13.8. So I would recommend using this calculator, and any attack speed between 123 and 140 basically does nothing for you. You want to try to reach a 12 frame breakpoint, try to get a total of 140.3 there, and then once you reach 140.3, try to get 145.3 so that you are just at maximum attack speed at all times. Early into the build, you can use attack speed on gloves instead of resource cost reduction, but it comes at a damage loss later on, and if you just masterwork your gear completely and max out your Paragon board, you will reach a breakpoint perfectly fine. Please, for the love of God, do not try to get 99% attack speed in Cap 1. You're not going to do it unless you have a 5 duelist. You have to have a Banished Lords with greater affix attack speed and max HP and core skills and a greater affix ring attack speed, or you need to go normal helmet with bottom Jaguar Spirit Hall for another 5%, and then you need to get ranks of defensive skills on your chest so that you can have more skill points out of Armored Hide to put it into the Hunter, so you have 100% uptime on your Ferocity stacks. Is your brain falling out of your head yet? Because my brain is. Oh my god, there's so much going on with this build. Just follow the planner. Okay, when it comes to actually playing with the build, let's just go run a pretty easy pit. And I'll just go over some general gameplay tips, but it's kind of the easiest build in the galaxy to play. I'll use Ebawaka just to show you guys that the build does not implode if you're not using a normal helmet, and I actually would be doing more damage if I were able to temper on Resilient onto my helmet, but you know, this is my Rawhide situation permanently, so I just can't really play the game. But anywho, I'll use my Ebawaka, and then what I like to do, because I like to min-max a little bit, when it comes to elixirs and consumables, maximum HP elixir is a ton of extra damage for you, and then we go into maximum life. You can use resistance all elements if you want, and then I do an armor one as well, just to armor cap me. I guess I forgot to mention that your other rune, you want to be the max HP rune, as well as invoke skill from another class paired with POC. That is going to be your best option, and you're just going to have your bulwark up 100% of the time, as well as a 20% extra max HP, and that's extra damage via your viscous shield. So I've got max HP, I've got armor, I've got max life, and then I think did I run out? I like to use an all stats incense as well, because the all stats helps me reach my breakpoints. With Ebawaka, I don't need it because I have 140. But when I play the other build, I like to go with that. Or sorry, when I use my normal helmet, I pretty much crutch on it. There it is, Chorus of War. I'll craft myself like 10 of these. They're pretty cheap, luckily, and we're going to be getting more Angel Breath when the update comes out. I don't want to do too high of a pit because, like, you don't need to. I can literally one-shot everything in a 115. I'll just do 120 so you can maybe, like, see higher numbers and see how to play. But I've done a 150. You don't need to do a 150. It's not fun. Don't worry. Please don't do a 150. You don't want to torture yourself. When it comes to playing with the build, you have all these buttons are basically conditional damage buffs. So you want to be pressing them off cooldown. But when it comes to like an order of buttons to press, before you go into the pack, press Ravager first so you get that extra Vigor Generation. I would jump in with the Hunter, then I would press Armored Hide, then I would press Scourge, and then immediately suck the mobs in with Vortex. So let's give you guys a little example of that. So I'll press Ravager. I'll get like a little group of mobs up. I'll press Hunter, Armored Hide, Scourge, and then suck all the mobs in. The reason that you want to use Scourge first before Vortex is if you don't, the enemies will run away, and that can be pretty annoying. You can instantly CC them by knocking them down with Lucky Hit, and it'll be fine, but like if I fear them, they'll run away, and if I don't have a Scourge, then all the mobs are spread out. But if I have my Vortex immediately afterwards, I'll suck them in together and then just kill them. Sometimes you'll notice positioning can be important with this build because just with the way that the Quill Volley hits actually work, sometimes your hits just won't really be hitting them, and then you'll kind of do no damage. You'll also notice that the majority of the damage is going to be your Jaguar Spirit Hall. As you can see, I use my Vortex first there, and then I completely griefed myself because the mobs ran away. Otherwise, like, you just want to spam your buttons on cooldown because you want to have Armored Hide up 100% of the time. You want the damage buff from the Hunter all the time, and if your Ravager ever runs out, your build will stop working entirely because you won't be getting the Vigor resets via Banished Lords. So, and your Ring of the Midnight Sun. So definitely make sure to always be pressing the Ravager whenever possible. But basically, I can kind of just hold right click and I'll just kill everything because the pit tier is so low. But for those of you guys that, you don't have perfect gear, right? So you will need to follow a little bit more closely and like actually press your buttons properly. But the biggest thing I'd say is just spamming stuff on cooldown, and don't grief yourself with the fear thing. Otherwise, it's very easy to play. And I'm going to have a speed farm version of this build posted pretty soon, where I'm just doing like T100s in like 10 seconds. Not 10 seconds actually, but you know what I mean. Like, I'm going to have that posted pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. I've just been like perfecting trying to hit for the biggest number possible for forever now. Very happy to swap off of it, to be honest, because I've just been min-maxing my gear like crazy. And it's kind of unnecessary. And I really like doing stuff fast. And that's why I recommend Eva Walker for most people, because not having movement speed is just pain. And I don't want, like, there's no reason to do a little bit more damage. For most of you guys, it's better to just have an easier to set up build, which you'll get via having the all stats, just easier for you. And also, like, the movement speed, literally getting 30% movement speed with my greater affix one anyway. It's just, like, insane quality of life. Running around like a turd is just not fun, right? And I would almost recommend movement speed on boots too, because you can just get like movement speed capped really easily. So I'll probably have that planned out as well. A lot of stuff with the build, like, I don't know, it's hard to explain because there's so many different ways that you can set it up, and also so many developments that happen on a daily basis. And a lot of stuff is also optional. Like, you can opt out of dexterity on gear because you don't really need the damage, so you could get more resistance and armor. But you could also just opt out of armor entirely, like I have, and just get more damage because you don't really need the armor or resistance because you have 30,000 health. So why do I need more armor or more resistance? Because I just can't die anyways. Like, there's all these little things that I've come to learn about this build, and also like little bugs. God, can I like find the last mob, dude? Also little bugs that like I want to explain, but then the video ends up being as long as it is, and a lot of it just isn't relevant to you guys, which is why I recommend just stare at the planner, like follow the planner like your life depends on it, because otherwise things are just going to get way too complicated for you, and it just simply is not necessary for things to be complicated. Just follow the planner and you'll be perfectly fine, and I'll update it with FAQs and all sorts of crazy stuff. Just know that a lot of stuff is optional, and you can swap it around based on not only preference, but also your current gear situation. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you have any feedback, leave it down in the comments, and I will try my best to flesh out the written guide for you guys so that there's all the information in there that you could ever need. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.